This is Beyond the Call, Medal of Honor Stories, from Dispatch, U.S. Military History Magazine, developed by trackpads.com. In this episode, we travel to the Pacific in 1945 to a burning aircraft carrier off the coast of Japan, where a quiet engineering officer made a promise in the dark and then kept it, leading hundreds of men out of a death trap deep inside the ship. Before we continue, I want to mention the Medal of Honor book series that accompanies this work. These books tell the stories of America's Medal of Honor recipients in a serious, readable, and historically grounded format, with each volume focused on a specific campaign, battle, or part of the war. They are available in color paperback, Kindle ebook, and matching audiobook editions. You can find them at militaryauthor.me. It is the morning of March 19, 1945. The U.S. Navy aircraft carrier, USS Franklin, is operating closer to the Japanese home islands than any American carrier has gone so far in the war. The ship is a floating airfield, nearly 900 feet long, packed with aircraft, fuel, and ordnance. On this morning, she is preparing to launch more strikes, and the routine of war at sea is in full swing. Flight crews move across the hangar and flight deck, bombs are being handled and armed, and deep below the waterline, the boilers and engines drive the carrier forward. It feels like another dangerous but familiar day in a long campaign. Then everything changes in a matter of seconds. A Japanese bomber slips through the cloud cover and past the outer defenses. Two bombs fall toward the carrier. One slams into the flight deck and detonates among aircraft that are already armed and fueled. The other penetrates deeper into the ship and triggers a chain reaction. Bombs, rockets, and ammunition begin to cook off. In an instant, Franklin becomes a maze of explosions, fire, and choking smoke. Compartments that were brightly lit turn black as the power fails. Steel bulkheads buckle. The ship lists. Hundreds of men are killed outright or wounded where they stand. On the open decks, sailors see flames rolling down the length of the ship and thick smoke boiling up into the sky. Inside, men are thrown from their feet as blasts tear through passageways. The air fills with dust and fumes. Emergency lighting fails in many spaces. The carefully rehearsed escape routes from drills are suddenly blocked by twisted metal, fire, and debris. Thousands of tons of steel, designed to keep the ship afloat and the crew safe, now feel like a trap with no exits. In this chaos, every decision must be made quickly and often in near total darkness. Somewhere on the third deck is Lieutenant, junior grade, Donald Arthur Gary. At first glance, he is not the kind of person most people picture when they think of a war hero. He is in his early 40s, older than many of the young sailors around him. He is not a fighter pilot or a famous captain. He is an engineering officer, a specialist in the machinery that keeps the ship alive. His journey to this moment began decades earlier, far from the Pacific, in the small city of Findlay, Ohio, where he was born on July 23rd. Gary joined the Navy as a teenager in December 1919, just after the First World War. He entered as an enlisted man and learned the fleet from the bottom up. Over more than 20 years, he worked his way through the ranks as a machinist and engineering specialist. By the early 1940s, he was serving ashore as an inspector of machinery, checking boilers for new ships and making sure they would stand up to the demands of war. It was important work, technical and demanding. It was also far from the front lines. In November 1943, after more than 2 decades in uniform, Gary received a commission as a lieutenant junior grade. A year later, he reported for sea duty as an engineering officer aboard USS Franklin, trading factory floors and test stands for the steel passageways and hot machinery spaces of a carrier at war. An engineering officer's responsibility is simple to describe but hard to carry. He is one of the people charged with keeping the ship alive. He oversees the spaces that produce steam and electricity, the pumps and valves, and the long network of pipes and cables that feed every system on board. In combat, those spaces are especially dangerous. They are deep inside the hull, hard to reach, and filled with high-pressure steam and fuel. If something goes wrong, escape can be difficult. That is exactly where Gary finds himself on March 19th when the bombs hit. When the initial shock passes and he regains his footing, Gary begins to move through the darkened interior of the carrier. Lights are out. Smoke is pouring through the passageways. He feels his way along bulkheads, guided by the sounds of distant shouting and the thud of continuing explosions. In that search, he comes upon a mess compartment, a large space that in peacetime would be used for meals. Now it is jammed with sailors. The doors they know are blocked. Fresh smoke is pushing in, The air is getting worse with each passing minute. Some of the men are hurt. Many of them are convinced they are trapped and will die there. Gary could accept that and move on. Instead, he tells the men something very different. He speaks up in a steady voice, cutting through the panic, and tells them he will find them a way out. It is a simple sentence, but everything that follows flows from that promise. He leaves the compartment alone, stepping back into the smoke-filled passageway beyond, and begins to search for an escape route. There is no map in his hand, no clear marker to follow. He has only his knowledge of the ship's layout and his determination to keep his word. He moves through damaged corridors, feeling his way around debris and past open spaces that flicker with red light from ongoing fires. The carrier is still shuddering from internal blasts as ordnance cooks off. Somewhere above, firefighters are battling infernos on the flight deck. Below, the sea presses hard against the hull. In between, Gary is trying to thread a path that leads from a dark, crowded compartment up toward air and daylight. Finally, he finds one. It is not an easy route. It winds through tight spaces and underhanging cables. It is narrow and hazardous, but it is open. Having found a way out, Gary does not take it for himself and disappear topside. He turns around and goes back into the mess compartment. He returns to the same group of men who saw him leave, not knowing if they would ever see him again. He tells them there is a path, explains where it runs, and begins to lead them out in groups. The route is so dangerous and confusing that it cannot simply be described and trusted to memory. He must personally guide them, group after group, along the twisting escape. Gary makes that journey multiple times. Each trip he enters the smoke and heat, gathers another cluster of men, and walks them through the same damaged spaces he explored alone. Some of the sailors are nearly blind from the smoke. Others are dazed by the blasts or injured. He encourages them, steadies them, and keeps them moving until they emerge into spaces where the air is clearer and the way forward is safer. Only when the mess compartment that held several hundred men is empty does he stop. The sailors who were certain they were doomed now have at least a chance to survive, because one officer refused to leave them behind. For most people, that would be enough for a lifetime. On that day aboard Franklin, it is only the first part of Gary's contribution. Once the trapped men are clear, he turns to the next critical task, keeping the ship herself alive. Fires are still raging on the flight deck among fueled and armed aircraft. Ordnance continues to explode. If the carrier cannot control the damage, she will either sink or be abandoned. Gary organizes and leads small firefighting parties into the exposed areas. It is brutal work. The deck is hot underfoot. Smoke blows across in shifting clouds. Fresh explosions can erupt without warning. Yet he repeatedly pushes forward with his teams, directing hose lines and attack angles, helping beat back the flames in section after section. At the same time, another crisis is unfolding deep below. Several of the carrier's main fire rooms, where boilers produce the steam that powers the ship, have been knocked out or rendered unusable. Without steam, Franklin cannot generate electricity for pumps, firefighting equipment, or steering, and she will lose the ability to maneuver. A burning, drifting carrier near the Japanese home islands would be an easy target and might well be lost. Recognizing the danger, Gary heads to the remaining fire room that can still be brought to life. Inside that space, the conditions are punishing. Heat radiates from damaged equipment. The air is heavy and close. There are leaks, alarms, and the constant threat of further flooding or explosion. Here, though, Gary's years as a machinist and engineering specialist become as important as his personal courage. He takes charge of the effort to raise steam in one of the remaining boilers. Under his direction, the team checks gauges, brings systems up cautiously but steadily, and pushes through each step required to restore power. It is not dramatic in the way a firefight is dramatic, but it is just as vital. Bit by bit, the pressure comes up. Pumps begin to work properly again. The ship can support damage control efforts and maintain some headway through the water. That change alters the entire course of the day. Because steam is restored, Franklin does not become a dead hulk at the mercy of wind and current. She can be maneuvered enough to avoid collisions and to work with escorting ships that come alongside to assist. Damage control teams have the power they need for their equipment. Throughout this period, other officers and enlisted sailors are also performing acts of great bravery and skill, from the captain on the bridge to the crewmen dragging hoses across burning decks. Gary's role links two crucial pieces. He has saved hundreds of men from a death trap below and helped give the ship the power she needs to survive. When the worst of the crisis finally passes, Franklin is a wrecked but living ship. Her flight deck is shattered, her island scorched and twisted, and many of her compartments ruined. She has suffered some of the heaviest casualties of any American warship that survives the conflict. Yet she is still afloat. Over the weeks and months that follow, as the Navy reconstructs what happened in detail, survivors repeatedly mention the engineering officer who appeared in their sealed compartment, promised to find them a way out, and then fulfilled that promise under fire. Those accounts form the backbone of the official Medal of Honor citation for Lieutenant Junior Grade Donald Arthur Gary. The citation describes his repeated trips through smoke-filled, debris-strewn passageways to lead hundreds of trapped men to safety. It also notes his later leadership in restoring power in a damaged fire room while the ship was still in grave danger. Like all such documents, the language is formal and carefully measured. But the conclusion is clear. It states that his conduct was in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service, and that he risked his life far beyond what duty required. Gary's story does not end with the award. After the war, he continues to serve. He is promoted and assigned to other posts as the Navy shifts from a wartime footing to a peacetime fleet. Shipmates later remember him as a professional sailor who remained more interested in doing his job than in talking about his own heroism. Eventually, after a long career that began as an enlisted machinist and carried him through one of the worst days aboard any American carrier, he retires at the rank of commander. He passes away in the late 1970s, far from the waters where Franklin burned but never sank. The Navy finds a lasting way to remember him. In the early 1980s, a new Oliver Hazard Perry-class guided missile frigate is commissioned with his name, USS Gary. The sleek modern hull, bristling with antennas and missiles, looks very different from the big propeller-driven carrier where he earned the Medal of Honor. But the choice of name sends a quiet message. For years afterward, sailors will serve aboard a ship named not for a famous admiral or a great battle, but for an engineering officer who once went back into the fire for his shipmates. Donald A. Gary's story sits at the intersection of technical skill, leadership, and personal courage. It reminds us that war at sea is not only a matter of pilots in cockpits or captains on the bridge. It also depends on the people who know the guts of the ship, who can read the tangle of compartments and systems, and who have the resolve to use that knowledge when everything is going wrong. His actions on March 19, 1945, were not improvised heroics from a stranger in an unfamiliar place. They were the result of years spent learning machinery, studying ship layouts, and understanding how all the pieces fit together. For students of military history, his experience underscores the value of preparation. For veterans and those still serving, it offers an example of leadership that begins with a simple statement made to frightened men in a dark, smoke-filled room: "I'll find you a way out." The power of his story lies not only in the promise itself, but in the way he fulfilled it, trip after trip, until the compartment was empty and the path was open. And for everyone who hears it, his Medal of Honor stands as a reminder that courage can look like a calm voice, a steady hand on a bulkhead in the dark, and a refusal to leave others behind when the ship is burning.